make it clear. Order. Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, she is a local board politician and editor of feminist blog The Hand Mirror, political commentator Julie Ferry, and he is one of Auckland's cultural princes, blogger and commentator Simon Prast. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, should the waterfront artwork glorifying union busting be removed? Issue 2, has Len Brown survived his scandal? And issue 3 tonight, John Key's been assured the US haven't spied on him, but what about the rest of us? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. The discovery among a series of officially sanctioned installations dedicated to the many lovers of Auckland outside the refurbished Shed 10 on Auckland's Queen's Wharf of a sculptural tribute and information panel dedicated to and celebrating the contribution of Jim Ross, one of the special constables responsible for breaking the Great Strike of 1913, has raised exactly 100 years later many troubling questions. Julie, how did public art that is effectively a tribute to union-bashing vigilantes manage to get sanctioned?
It does seem quite bizarre, doesn't it? And I have to say, as someone who's worked in the union movement for the last 10 years, the idea of having public art that basically says it's okay to hit people because they're union members.
Yeah.
We have countries overseas where union organisers like myself routinely get shot. And to say that a time in our history when that kind of stuff happened, albeit not shooting, is something we should celebrate, it's really worrying.
How did it manage to get through?
I mean, there have to be some serious questions asked there, and I think Mike Lee's investigating it. He is the descendant of some of those who struck in 1913. My own grandfather was in the 51 lockout. It is something that is, the industrial action on the waterfront is something that is very close to the heart of many people in the union movement and more broadly amongst the left. So how they thought they were going to sneak it through, I have no idea. And who came up with it as an idea?
I've walked past that sculpture I was thinking about it about 24 times. But it was only last weekend when I was out there with my daughter and we were walking around the waterfront that I thought, what does that actually mean? Because it looks like a guy with a very large club in his hand, and I couldn't think of any time in New Zealand's history where we would be celebrating that. And when I went up to it and read it, my jaw hit the ground. In the way that it was framed and the language used. And I immediately went off to Mike Lee and we started having a sort of a focus on it. But it doesn't seem that it was vetted. Should public art be vetted before it goes live?
I think we get into very dangerous ground about how vetting happens.
That's right.
Because you don't want, a lot of public art people won't necessarily like. But there is a definite role for public art. There is, a piece of public art that makes you have a reaction, whether that's good or bad in my book, is actually a worthwhile piece of public art, makes you think. So we don't want to get to a situation where it's only public art that's soft and fluffy and everybody can agree they like it. We do need confrontational public art. But we don't need public art that is confrontational by encouraging violent confrontation.
Simon, would this be like a monument to the pro-Springbok Tour supporters? Is that the sort of thing that almost the category this falls into?
I think it is inappropriate, and I agree with Julie. I think that public art is to be supported and it should be provocative, but it shouldn't be propaganda. And I mean, in itself and of itself, this thing looks like a piece of fascist propaganda. And the commentary alongside it is, an entirely revisionist view of history.
Yes, right. Yes.
And I just think that context is all. It's highly inappropriate, and it doesn't make sense as part of a narrative of the lovers of Auckland. So on its own terms, as a commission, I mean, you'd have to be one of the commissioners and go, well, how does this exactly fit in? I mean, it's a very dark chapter in New Zealand's history, and it should be remembered and it should be discussed. But this is not the forum.
What do you think public art should endeavour to do? What's its role?
Well, particularly, in a location, if it evokes like the Maori Wars or something like this, if it evokes discussion of it. You mentioned the Springbok tours, and I was thinking about those terrible riots outside Eden Park. And I mean, how would you feel if you had a big statue of a policeman in riot gear? I mean, it's something that we need to remember, but it's not something that needs to be immortalized in art. I don't think.
Julie, our history is littered with examples of the state using violence against unions.
Yep.
Why do we know so little of our own history of worker rights to think that celebrating the Massey Cossacks was a just idea?
I think there is a definite lack of knowledge, and a lot of it, there has been a lot of revision as well, and particularly in the late 80s and early 90s, there was this real hollowing out of understanding of the role of unions as civic institutions, that in a lot of ways they are actually some of the largest democratic institutions that we have, and the role that they play in dealing with the power imbalance in the workplace, but also more broadly outside that. In Australia, for example, some unions have picked up on climate change and have been working really hard on that, partly because they want to promote green jobs, because a lot of their workers are in what will be sunset industries under climate change, but also because it's an issue of social justice. So there has been a loss of that connection for a lot of people. We have a low rate of unionisation, particularly outside the public sector.
Would detractors say the winners of history get to rewrite it? I mean, would the Cameron Slaters of the world say, well, you know, we won, so you guys lost too bad?
Well, it's not over yet. It would be the first thing to say to that. And also, I mean, we're talking about real people. We're talking about working people and their power and their lack of power. And, you know, I actually find it quite frightening the way that a lot of work is structured now, on contracts in particular, which basically just use people and spit them out as if they aren't actually human beings, as if they're widgets. And as long as that's the case, unions have a vital role.
Do you think part of the problem is that we do not look any longer for jobs with dignity? That's part of the problem? That really, well, you're just some disposable unit, I'm trying to get you for the cheapest price possible. There's no dignity in that kind of dimension of viewing work, is there?
And I have to say, I inadvertently found myself watching the movie made recently about William Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery. And in it, some of the statements made about how can we treat other people like this, how can we treat them as not being human beings and not being equal to us. And I was thinking, actually, a lot of that translates to the living wage. How can we, in good conscience, say to some people in our society, I don't think you're worth enough to live off? How can we do that?
Some supporters of the arts will say that this should stay and that removing it is in itself quite regressive. Is public art that distorts history, is that valid?
No, it's not valid. I think in Germany, for example, I don't think they have many statues of Ernst Röhm, head of the Brown Shirts, a very sad, unfortunate chapter in Germany's history. And Germany treats its Nazi history with the greatest tact and the greatest respect for history. They don't want to forget it, but of course they're aware that it exists in the society, and they don't want it to repeat. And so history is treated with enormous respect, so that things don't happen again and again and again. And I think that we're talking about New Zealand's history. I mean, we have, for a little innocent, sweet country all the way down here, we have a very interesting history. And I think that we could do a lot more about exploring what has happened in our past and how it has a direct bearing on how we are now and how we move forward.
How do you think art plays a role in telling that narrative? I mean, here we have a situation where it seems it has only reinforced one particular distorted version of our history. Where should artists play a role in terms of telling that story?
Well, Shakespeare, of course, wrote during the time of James I. And some say, well, there's history's greatest propagandist at work. And, you know, good old Richard III, for example, whose body was discovered this year, actual history doesn't paint him as such a villain. Shakespeare, of course, has done the ultimate hatchet job. And forever, he'll be known as a villain. And of course, old Kate and Wills, they named their child George. And I was thinking, would I ever live to see the day that we'll see a royal child called Richard? No, never.
Not yet.
No, art has a very important role to play, and people need to treat the process with a little bit more time and the implication of a commission. Not so many happen.
Final question to both of you. David Farrar, of course, hijacked the word union this week by launching the Taxpayers Union. Will it be a union either of you joining?
No way.
You won't be joining that?
Well,
No.
I mean, I pay taxes. We all pay taxes. But I'm hoping they're not going for compulsory unionism. That would be the ultimate hypocrisy.
I didn't sign up to the Pākehā Party, so I don't think I'll be signing up to this union.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with our second issue tonight. After a tumultuous month of sex scandals, Len Brown has been sworn in this week as the mayor of the Super City. Can Len survive, and can Len make real gains for Auckland? Simon, has Len Brown survived?
Yes, most definitely. I don't thank him for conjuring the image of him cavorting naked.
Yes.
Be that as it may. There's no allegation of criminality.
Yep.
This was between consenting animals. No children were involved. No animals were involved.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
this isn't a Jimmy Savile scandal or anything like this.
So it's
This
a
is
sin, but it's not a crime.
exactly that. As compared to a former mayor of Auckland who finds himself facing criminal charges.
Yes.
And if proved, someone out there engaged in potentially criminal activity trying to subvert an election. Now that is the scandal.
Yes.
What Len Brown got up to is unfortunate, and again, I don't thank him for conjuring the image.
Indeed.
But I was thinking about this, is that the Super City was a hospital pass in many ways, and really only a politician of Len Brown's nature, non-confrontational, could make headway under such circumstances.
That's a good point.
I think he's done a great job. Any other politician, I think, would have played on the divisions.
Yes.
That's not in Len's nature. And I think over the last 3 years, he's done a fantastic job under those circumstances. And I just don't think it's an issue. And those people who bring it up, really, it's just pure prurience. This is 2013, it's not 1953. Adultery is not a crime.
You once ran for the mayoralty of Auckland. You look at the level of sleaze that this dropped to, the real nasty viciousness of it. Is it enough to make people step back and have second thoughts about getting into politics, do you think?
So long as there are loose units out there, and I mean, I understand that this was sort of an unwritten code, that this is pervasive in New Zealand political life, that not just Len Brown, but many other politicians are engaged in such things, to the extent that it's not news. We just put that aside and we deal with the matter at hand. Now, have things changed? Some people say, well, we've crossed a Rubicon. We've reached a new low. And this has, I think, great bearing on the sanctity of our electoral process. Are people going to be allowed to pull grenades like this? Because apparently this was common knowledge about Mr. Brown for 2 years.
That's right.
And I'd never even suspect. But it only became an issue, amazingly coincidentally, around an election. And it's the sanctity of our elections and how we vote, all those sorts of things, which are under threat here.
Julie, as a local body politician, how has this scandal impacted on the perception of local politics, do you think?
Well, last week we had our compulsory legal briefings that all people have been re-elected have to have before they are sworn in. And there's a very tense conversation about conflicts of interest.
Yep.
And but it was quite clear in that briefing that this kind of stuff really doesn't touch what we do. Only if you gave preferential treatment.
Right.
Only if they got a contract they would otherwise not have got.
Right.
Only if you
There's
created
graft,
a job
right?
for
You've
them.
actually got to see graft.
Yeah, that's right. And to be honest, I actually quite like the way Simon Wilson put it in Metro, where he talked about, people have been sort of saying, oh, well, he would have been distracted. Well, none of us noticed that he was distracted,
That's right.
first start.
Yeah.
But secondly, how many people in the throes of a new love affair, especially something illicit, find they have boundless energy and massive enthusiasm for life? And so, for all we know, it was enhancing his performance.
Yeah. Look, you're absolutely right. Simon, can Len get the gains he was mandated with from Wellington when so many National Party insiders were deeply involved in releasing this scandal?
Well, all of those National Party insiders, I guess, now run the risk of becoming outsiders because this has sort of changed from Lewinsky to Watergate.
Yep.
And if there was a deliberate attempt to subvert the will of the electorate, then I think it is the duty of journalists to follow that up, as Bernstein and Woodward did, and that will be the end of several political careers, if true. That is the most important thing that happened. As I say, what Len did in his private time, no one cares. Trying to do this, that is the most dangerous thing you can have in a democracy.
Yes.
And that needs to be followed back to its source. This can't become the
new normal.
The new normal.
It certainly is concerning, is it not, when the mayor has to go to Wellington and say, we want extra infrastructure, and there is a nagging doubt in his mind that perhaps some of the people he's talking to had knowledge of a scandal that was brewing against him. I mean, that makes it very difficult, does it not, in terms of negotiating a better deal for Auckland?
I don't think it makes any difference. None at all. Because, I mean, I would imagine that Len got on and was probably sitting there looking someone in the eye thinking, well, I know things about you, which was how interesting. But who cares? I mean, in our everyday lives, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's irrelevant.
Do you think that it could be maybe sort of taken the other way, that maybe National don't want to deal with Len?
Well, it's really not up to National to decide. It was up to the people of Auckland to decide, and the people of Auckland did decide.
Twice.
Twice they decided. And I mean, if National wants to do away with elections, then well, let's have a talk about that.
Don't give them ideas. Julie, does the sleazy manner in which National Party members were involved in this scandal suggest that next year's election is going to be incredibly dirty?
It could be, and I have to say, you know, talking to women, trying to encourage them to run.
Sure.
For local body positions in particular, there is a fear about exposure of your private life. Not necessarily that you've done anything wrong, but that you just don't want people talking about your private life. And it does put people off running. So that concerns me, that there will be people who might otherwise have run next year who will think, oh, if that thing comes out that I did 10 years ago, that would be bad for the party and I shouldn't run. And whether parties will also, in their candidate selection process, be asking those questions of, you know, so have you ever had an affair? You know, did you ever inhale? Those kinds of things. You know, and actually those are not the thing. They sometimes speak to character, but they are not the only determinant of character. And in a political environment, you're all flawed human beings. All the time you're sitting there thinking, yeah, I can see what you're saying, I can hear what you're saying, but I know that you've actually been saying this behind my back, blah, blah, blah. But you still have to have the conversation, you still have to work it through. And so you should be able to leave some of that stuff at the door, I think. Len hasn't been a hypocrite here. He didn't put himself up as a moral arbiter on the issue of, you know, faithfulness to his wife, and he, you know, he hasn't paraded his family at every opportunity by any means. Shan, as Mayoress, has taken a very backroom role, as opposed to, say, Bob Parker's wife, who's had her own office, and,
yes, that's right.
you know, her own staff. Shan has not operated as a you know, Mayoress out there in full regalia. So I think it's a matter between them.
Final question of both of you. Who do you think the winners and the losers in this sordid little interlude are?
Penny Holst is the winner.
Yes.
I thought she handled it expertly.
Yes.
I think that Len Brown, given the situation he stupidly found himself in, I thought he dealt with it expertly. And the sort of the train wreck on the other side of just loose units and grenades and all this sort of thing, I think it is highly, highly unfortunate. It's like this weeping ulcer, and it just is a bad look.
Winners and losers?
Well, I can't really think of any winners, to be honest, but I can think of some big losers, and one of those would be Bevan Schwung, the woman involved. I think, I know Bevan slightly, and I hope that she's okay, because this must have been really difficult for her, and the more that comes out, the more we see that she has been used.
By every single male who seems to, from Len Brown through to Luigi, through to Slater, through to Cook, through to Polino, through to everybody involved. Not once did any of them stop and go, oh, some pretty, awful things seem to have happened to you. Can I help you or assist you?
Yeah.
Not one of them did they?
Well, I mean, I think Len is in a slightly different category there
Yeah.
because he wasn't using the affair for his own political
Sure,
advantage.
sure.
But I think, I do worry for her because
Mm.
she is ambitious politically and this will be very hard for her to come back from. The other potential loser is actually Judith Collins, because Slater is very much associated with her faction within the National Party
That's
and
right.
with her bid for future leadership.
That's right.
And so I'm really hoping this puts the kibosh on her as a future national leader.
Thank you, panel. Moving on finally with issue 3 tonight. John Key's been assured the US haven't spied on him, but what about the rest of us? Julie, it was cringe-worthy watching Jonathan Coleman gift Chuck Hagel an all-black shirt when the international news media wanted to quiz him on the latest Snowden revelations. Does the New Zealand government take these allegations of mass surveillance seriously?
Well, clearly not. The irony, I guess, or the hypocrisy, is that if it were a Labour government, National would be feeling very uncomfortable about a lot of this, and so would a lot of their backers. But as long as they're in power, it's in their interests, I guess, to be able to have access to information.
Writing the entire thing off as a joke. Oh,
Yeah.
they'll just be hearing us snort. That just... You've got international leaders demanding the ambassadors come to their offices and explain what the hell they think they're doing, and we're cracking jokes.
Exactly.
How does this put us instead for that UN Security Council seat? There's no way.
Well,
There's no way we can get that now, is there?
It really reinforces the idea that we're just, Middle Earth, that we are these hobbits who are somehow disconnected from reality
Yep.
and don't actually have a stake as players
Yeah.
on the international scheme. When actually our history shows us that we can be very significant players.
That's right.
Nuclear-free, apartheid. These were issues where New Zealand stepped up, and they're issues where the US would have very much liked, particularly with the nuclear-free issue, to be able to surveil all of our political leaders
yes.
willy-nilly.
Simon, is that terrible grating noise the sound of David Longy rolling
Oh,
in his
dear.
grave? We can't seriously claim to have an independent foreign policy.
No,
can we?
no. I mean, what a shameful, craven performance by Coleman in front of the world's press. And I believe we should take him at his word. If he says that, if they listened in, nothing important or whatever, well, okay, let's all have a listen in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not true. I mean, I think it's interesting that the latest US ambassador is a former Goldman Sachs investment banker.
Isn't that just...
I think it's interesting that the US Navy is coming down to have trials with the New Zealand Navy just before oil exploration starts offshore.
Yes.
That we're part of the Echelon group, whatever. I think there's a good possibility that we'll get tarred with the same brush and that we'll look like a dirty little co-conspirator in all of this mess.
And a client state.
And exactly,
yeah.
And that we don't have an independent foreign policy, is that we're just a front person for the United States, and that I think is a great shame, and David Longy would be rolling in his grave.
Quick question of both of you. What does our largest trading partner, China, make of all of this?
Oh yes, that must be very interesting, because weren't we worried about Huawei and
Yeah.
their connections with the Communist
Well,
Party?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Doesn't that
so-
look incredibly hypocritical with the revelations that the NSA have just been directly going into Google and Microsoft and just taking the information from them?
And I think also, there's been a lot of agitation recently, I think rightly so, about releasing the TPPA. And so how the government on the one hand can say we're not worried about being surveilled by the US because we don't have anything interesting to say, but on the other hand, you, the citizens of our own country, can't know about this major deal that we're doing,
Yeah.
doesn't sync up.
Beijing have bent over backwards in terms of giving us access to their markets and getting as much milk powder as we can make in this country sold in there. They are going to be looking at this and saying, why are we giving you such a good deal, aren't they?
It's a great dilemma for New Zealand and Australia in the 21st century because the United States and China have issues. And we have history mainly with the United States, but of course things are changing in our economic interests, and suddenly the Pacific becomes very alive. And
Yes.
I think that what happens in these early years of the century will be very interesting as time proceeds.
Let's wrap the show with the final word. Julie, your final word this week is?
My final word was just about making sure that you continue to hold politicians accountable, even when there's not an election on. It's really important. We've just had one for local body politicians, but please keep calling us, keep emailing us. You know, look at our actions. Do we follow through on what we said we would before the election? Ask us why we're not. Applaud us when we do. That accountability between elections is absolutely a vital part of democracy.
3 quick things that you would look to do right now to get more people voting in the next local body elections.
Well, firstly, if I could, I would make everybody campaign on actual issues, not just put a photo of themselves and talk about how they're in the local Rotary Club.
Yep.
Secondly, I think also we need more resourcing for advertising at the local level. I'm not quite sure how we do that, but there needs to be more awareness.
Yep.
And thirdly, we need to actually give people a stake. If they don't think their vote will mean anything, why vote?
Sure.
So that's about politicians and the way that we act and the way we operate, that we need to do meaningful things.
Simon, your final word this week?
I have to write mine down, it's so important.
Go for it.
After the hugely successful round of asset sales, the hugely popular and much supported Sky City Convention Centre deal, and the imminent, practically risk-free but hugely beneficial deep-sea oil exploration off Kaikoura's whale-watching coast, the government has come up with another solid gold, gilt-edged, guaranteed winner of an idea, a green light for the world's longest monorail. Fans of The Simpsons are well aware of all that a monorail can offer towns like Brockway, Ogdenville, North Haverbrook, Shelbyville and Springfield, and soon we can add Te Anau and Queenstown to that list. Former Southland District Mayor Franna Cardno calls it an obnoxious eyesore through World Heritage land. And when it comes to thinking up an epitaph for this government's policies, I can think of no better line.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Simon. Ladies and gentlemen, my final word. When they came for Close Up and replaced it with 7 Sharp, I didn't care because I thought Close Up was pretty awful. When they came for The Vote and replaced it with 10 more tedious episodes of Third Degree, I didn't say anything because I only watched Third Degree for Paula Penfield's stories. But when they came for Nightline to replace it with Paul Bloody Henry 5 nights a week, when a failed Australian TV flop who got sacked from the state broadcaster for jaw-dropping racism after a long history of vilifying every minority in the country is the new news mouthpiece 5 nights a week for the National Party on TV3, you appreciate how lost we've become. When food porn, corporate music talent quests and capital gains tax-free property renovations rule prime time, consumers trump citizens. It's not the block, it's the blocked. We desperately need public broadcasting. With this sort of pap being force-fed to the masses, no wonder citizens are brain-dead consumers and Key rides high in the polls. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.